Has Chris Bassitt thrown his last game for the New York Mets? How much money will he make in free agency, and where could he land if not with the Mets? We'll be answering all of those questions about his free agency on this edition of Locked On Mets.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're watching Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. If you want to find any of my work, follow me on Twitter at FinkelsteinRyan. You can also find some of my writing at justbaseball.com, where I work as a managing editor and where I just wrote a free agent profile on Chris Bassitt, which we're going to discuss today. And when going through Bassitt's career, one thing I didn't realize, which I had a general sense of, I knew he wasn't a first-round pick, but I did not know that Bassitt was drafted in the 16th round and spent his first couple of seasons as a relief pitcher. That's generally what happens when you have these guys that aren't heralded as top prospects, but he really started to establish himself early on. He was actually drafted by the White Sox, and eventually they make that transition where he begins to pitch out of the rotation in 2013, made 26 starts, pitched to a 3.08 ERA, between high A and double A, ends up getting selected to go to the Arizona Fall League, was great there at 0.90 ERA across 10 innings pitched, and he really put himself on the map as a guy that could crack the rotation in 2014, and he eventually did, but first he broke his hand. That really sidelined him. It wasn't until the end of the season that he finally was able to make his MLB debut, but did not pitch in many games, only 6 down the stretch. After the season, though, he was traded in a deal that if we went back in time, I guarantee you the White Sox would have loved to take it back. But they acquired Jeff Samardzija from the Oakland Athletics in exchange for a package of prospects that included not only Chris Bassitt, but also future All-Star Marcus Semien. Bassitt began 2015 in AAA, ultimately pitched in 18 games, 13 starts for the Athletics, and had a 3.56 ERA. The following season, did not have much success in 5 starts, but he was pitching through injury, as we later would learn, because he needed Tommy John surgery. So the Tommy John ends up knocking him out for almost all, essentially, of 2016 and 2017, and even a large part of 2018. Does not make his full return to a big league mound until June 9th, 2018. Was still up and down between AAA and the big leagues that season, but did fare well when at the big league level to 3.06 ERA in 47 and 2/3 innings pitched. But that's where Chris Bassitt eventually got himself to the point that he could be counted on as one of the most reliable and durable starting pitchers in baseball. For some guys, it takes a lot of time. For Bassitt, it wasn't until 2019 when he finally put it all together, throwing 144 innings. And you look at what he did in his final 3 years, atop really the Athletics rotation as he led them in wins, innings pitched, and ERA. From that 3-year span starting in 2019, including the shortened season in 2020, as well as the 2021 campaign, he pitched to a 3.26 ERA, the 12th best mark among all big league starters, and again, leading the teams in all those primary categories. That was why the Mets really did value him and went out and they acquired him in that trade prior to this season. And look, here he was again. As much as we can discuss Max Scherzer and obviously Jacob deGrom at the end of the year, Chris Bassitt was that guy. He was the one you could count on. He's the one that was out there every fifth day. He pitched to a 3.42 ERA, which was the lowest of any of the Mets starters that were in the rotation the full year. That's better than Carrasco. That's better than Taijuan Walker. And while it's not better than Scherzer, he took the ball 10 more times than Max Scherzer. And the Mets fared very well in the game started by Chris Bassitt. So once again, here he is leading a staff in starts, wins, innings pitched, and even ERA to a certain extent based on who qualified. And really, he actually is the only pitcher in this Mets rotation that did qualify for an ERA title this year. He enters free agency right now as a clear-cut, top-flight starting pitcher. Is he an ace? Is he higher on people's, free agent rankings than a Justin Verlander or Jacob deGrom or a Clayton Kershaw or Carlos Rodon. No, but I think he's the top of that next tier, or at least right up there with Jose Quintana and Tyler Anderson. That tier B, the guy that is going to get a 5-year deal, I believe, or at least a 4-year deal at a significant salary. Chris Bassitt has put himself in a position as a 16th round pick to hit free agency as a top starting pitcher in baseball. That's an incredible accomplishment from him, to get to that point. Some of these guys who are at that late, to just make your debut, that's a successful professional career based on where he was drafted. To have now 8 big league seasons under his belt, to go through the injuries that he went through, to come out the other side of it, and to prove that he can be that guy that can do, one of the most valuable things that you can in baseball. That's the thing we don't talk about enough. We always focus on ERA and strikeouts and all these things when addressing pitchers. Give me the guy that takes the ball. That's what teams need to get through a regular season. That's why he's going to have a really healthy amount of suitors. I think the one thing that you could say about Chris Bassitt is you had the series against the Braves at the end of the season. Doesn't make it out of the third inning, gives up 4 runs. You have the wild card game where Joe Musgrove completely outduels him. He doesn't make it past 4, gives up 3 runs. Those 2 starts may have teams, the Mets included, questioning if he can be a frontline guy in a playoff rotation. But what no one's going to question is his ability to be one of your top 3 pitchers that will be great to get you through the grind that is a 162-game season. But how much money will he get based on what he offers? That is what we'll discuss in just a minute. Before we do, though, the numbers don't lie. In the last decade, over 4 million people have chosen SimpliSafe Home Security to protect their home. You don't earn the trust of that many people without doing something right. And at SimpliSafe, your safety is the only thing that matters. I know because I have SimpliSafe, and I feel so much better knowing that there's this cutting-edge security technology that is watching over me, powered by 24/7 professional monitoring agents that always have my back. With the 24/7 professional monitoring, SimpliSafe's agents call you the moment a threat is detected and dispatch police or first responders in an emergency, even if you're not home or can't be reached. SimpliSafe blankets your home in protection with advanced sensors for every room, window, and door, HD security cameras for inside and outside your home, smarter ways to detect motion that only alerts you when a threat is real, and even hazard sensors that instantly detect fires, floods, and other threats to your home. Customize the perfect system for your home in just a few minutes at simplisafe.com/LockedOnMLB. You're going to save 20% on your SimpliSafe security system when you sign up for an interactive monitoring plan and get your first month for free. Visit simplisafe.com/LockedOnMLB to learn more. There's no safe like SimpliSafe. How much money will Chris Bassitt land in free agency? It's always tough to do these projections, and the simplest way is to look at the last year's free agent crop to find the comparable pitchers, to see what deals they struck, and then to base that on what you expect a Bassitt to make in this case. And to me, I look at last year's market, and Chris Bassitt is older than a lot of the guys that got the long-term deals, but he's not quite Max Scherzer at 37. You can't compare him to Max Scherzer based on their respective pedigrees. So the 3 names that jumped out to me to find a barometer for Chris Bassitt was Robbie Ray and Kevin Gausman. That's the high end, okay? Those guys were 30 when they hit free agency compared to Bassitt at 33 and coming off better seasons. Now, I think Bassitt, is right up there when it comes to career success, or at least over, the 3 or 4 years heading into free agency as those guys probably were. So I think it's a safe comp to evaluate the high end. And Robbie Ray got a little more than Gausman at $115 million over 5. Gausman $110 over 5, I think, is the perfect high-end barometer. That's $22 million a year. But I think for Chris Bassitt, to reach that type of an AAV, I think you're looking at a shorter contract. So highest possible value I can see there is, him signing that over a 4-year deal where it's $88 million. Even that feels a little bit rich to me. Really, I think that the way he would get that type of an AAV is if it was a 3-year deal. Let's just say he signs, a 3-year $66 or $65 million deal, or maybe it's 3 for 60, something like that. That's where I think he could get over $20 million. But more likely, I think he's looking less than that. And the contract that I think makes even more sense is Eduardo Rodriguez, who signed a deal with the Tigers, a 5-year, $77 million deal that will pay him $15.4 million per season. When I really dove into it, thought about it, the contract that came back to me that made the most sense, that was between the two when it comes to average annual value, but was also a tick below in years, is a 4-year deal worth $70 million, which has Chris Bassitt getting paid $17.5 a year. I think that's right about online for what you could expect him to get. That could potentially be a contract that has a 5th-year option with a buyout that gets that guaranteed to the $70 million. But I think that that's a realistic offer, and that is where we discussed the qualifying offer here. Bassitt has to decide what he wants to do. I ultimately think he'll decline both his player option for 19 and the qualifying offer for 19.56, but every single year, there's one of these guys, I think, was it Brett Anderson one year that accepted it? Kevin Gausman accepted it with the Giants. Marcus Stroman accepted it with the Mets. There's always that starting pitcher that gets offered $19.56 million, and maybe they talk to their agent. Who knows? Maybe I'm overvaluing what Bassitt could make. And maybe his agent tells him, look, I think we're going to get you like 15 a year over a long-term deal. So if you want, you can sign a $60 million contract over 4 years, or you can get close to 20 this year, hit free agency the following season without the QO attached, where there's no draft pick compensation that teams will have to forfeit to get you, and you might enjoy a healthier market. I think when it comes to Chris Bassitt, having the QO attached could impact him in a bad way, and then that also could open the door for the Mets to be the team that swoops back in and signs him, maybe at a reasonable number. Who knows? If it's all about years for him, maybe you can get that AAV lower than you'd even expect by giving him a 5-year deal. Let's just say, you give him $14 million a year, so that would be what? That would get you right back to the 70, right? 5 times 4 is 20. Yes, I'm correct. Maybe you're talking about $70 million over 5 years for Chris Bassitt with some incentives baked in. I don't know exactly where he's going to fall, because I think that there's the fact that he's pitched to a sub-3 ERA for the past 4 seasons, been consistent, or sub-3.5 ERA, excuse me. That leads me to believe that he should be able to command a pretty healthy salary, and the 4-year 70 makes sense to me at 17.5 per season. But we also don't know what the market's going to dictate when he has that qualifying offer attached. I mean, if you're a team that's signing Jacob deGrom or Carlos Rodon, I think you feel pretty comfortable losing a draft pick to get him. For Bassitt, I don't know if teams are going to be as open to the idea of paying him north of $15 million per season over a long-term deal while forfeiting a pick. That's just a lot to give up for a pitcher that on the biggest stage didn't come through down the stretch of the season. Still, though, he's going to be coveted. I can make the case for 10 different teams signing him this offseason, but there was 5 in particular that I spotlighted in my article, so we're going to discuss those landing spots in just a minute. But first, a quick word from our sponsors. Where could Chris Bassitt sign in free agency? The New York Mets were the first team I listed, obviously I just made the case for it. It makes sense. It really does. The second team that I listed, the St. Louis Cardinals. You look at the Cardinals, they have Adam Wainwright coming back. They have Miles Michaelis. They have Jack Flaherty and Steven Matz with injury concerns. Matthew Liberatore hasn't really established himself just yet. Jordan Montgomery, pitched for them this season after the deadline. They have some options, but they don't have a lot of consistency in that rotation, and it's also a rotation that's pretty left-handed with Matz and also with Jordan Montgomery, and they had Jose Quintana this past season as well. I don't know why they wouldn't just return and re-sign Quintana. That's also certainly an option, but if they want another right-hander, if they want someone that they can count on to eat innings, Chris Bassitt could be their guy. Now, we get to my favorite of my landing spots for Bassitt, the Baltimore Orioles. I love this fit for Bassitt, for that team. They're not going to really, I think, be realistically in the market for a Carlos Rodon, but I do believe they need an ace. At the same time, they have DL Hall, they have Grayson Rodriguez, some of the best pitching prospects in baseball who could slot right atop their rotation as soon as next season. What Bassitt does is he takes the pressure off those guys. He's the innings eater. He can start an opening day. He can be your ace. He was an ace in the American League with the Athletics. That's fine. And he can really lead by example and show these guys what it means to be a big league starter. But then you get to a potential wild card round if you can make it and you can, have your first playoff berth since 2016 in Baltimore. Then you can actually start Bassitt in game 3. And if those two guys can be what you hope they can be, suddenly you would have guys that you trust going in the playoffs. And I think Bassitt is honestly a great number 3 starter in the game right now. You're being greedy, and I think the Mets have every right to be and to want 3 starters better than Chris Bassitt in their playoff rotation next year. But for most teams, you'd be hard-pressed to find a better 3rd starter. And again, I think for specific teams like the Orioles, Bassitt can be even more than that when it comes to role in leadership. And I just think that makes the most sense. At the bottom of the article, my prediction was Chris Bassitt signs a 5-year, $70 million contract with the Orioles. But another team that I was predicting he would sign with during the playoffs is the Padres. I said, watch him end up reuniting with Bob Melvin and playing with the team that just beat him. I still think that's a possibility. He at one point called Bob Melvin one of his best friends in baseball. Bob Melvin gushed about him when the Mets acquired Bassitt. Buck Showalter talked about how he had spent a lot of time getting positive feedback from Melvin about Bassitt. There is clearly a mutual respect there. They're looking at a season upcoming here where, yes, they'll still have Blake Snell, Yu Darvish, Joe Musgrove, but that number 4 spot in their rotation was a real Achilles heel in the playoffs. Chris Bassitt as your number 4 is amazing. And so for the Padres, that is a fit that makes a lot of sense. The Boston Red Sox were the other team we mentioned in the article because, look, they're always in the market, but I think if they see that the writing's on the wall a bit with the way the Orioles are looking, with the fact that the Blue Jays are a competitive playoff team, the Rays always are in the playoffs, the Yankees aren't going anywhere, they might look around that division and be like, it's really tough to compete. We're the Red Sox. We got to try. Let's get a guy in Chris Bassitt that can be in our rotation for the next 4 or 5 seasons, that can eat up innings, but you don't have to spend the DeGrom price tag, the Verlander price tag, the Kershaw price tag, or the Rodon price tag. So I see that as another logical fit. As you can go up and down the line, though. I mean, the Phillies are going to have some money to spend after this World Series run they're on. They might want a better starter to slot behind Nola and Wheeler. Maybe there's a team in the Central. The Cubs last year signed Stroman. Who knows if they wouldn't want to add somebody else? Maybe the Pirates want a starter to lead their rotation as they try to move out of a rebuild. Any team in baseball really could use a Chris Bassitt. It's just that simple. There's not a team out there that would look at a pitcher that can give them 180 innings and make 30 starts and pitch to a sub-3.5 ERA and say, yeah, I don't want that. It's just a matter of how much the bidding is going to drive up his price tag, how many years does he want, and where does he want to play? What does he want? Because a lot of times we forget about that when it comes to free agency. What is Chris Bassitt's chief motivation here? Is it to win a World Series? Is it to get the longest deal possible after such an arduous path to get to free agency? Is it about playing for Bob Melvin again? Is it about going back to the West Coast? Is it staying with the New York Mets because he liked it so much? We really don't know. Of all the Mets' top-tier free agents, and I think he slots right behind the big 3 that we continue to discuss with Diaz, DeGrom, and Nimmo, I don't see a scenario where he comes back other than the qualifying offer. I think if he accepts the qualifying offer, you can retain him. But I think if it's over a long-term deal, I believe the Mets are ultimately going to want to spend money in other places, and I think that they're going to be pretty happy to get some draft compensation for Chris Bassitt on top of it. And that's only going to make him a little bit less attractive as a free agent because, hey, you can just let him sign somewhere else, collect a little bit of extra capital, and spend that money on maybe a different pitcher. Maybe you think Nathan Eovaldi has a higher upside when it comes to winning a playoff game, and so you want to spend your money in that direction when he's coming off a little bit of a down year where you can get him at a cheaper price tag. These are all things that will be discussed by the front office over the coming days, weeks, and potentially months. But that's going to be all for today's edition of Locked On Mets. On tomorrow's show for a Friday Farm Report, I will once again be joined by Jordan Grossman, social media coordinator, and we are going to discuss our awards for the Mets minor leagues. Top pitcher, top hitter, top reliever. Maybe we'll go through some of the best tools. I haven't really ironed out exactly all of the details for that episode, but it's going to be a fun one. Make sure you check it out. Make sure you follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcast. Make sure you follow me on Twitter, @Finkelstein Ryan. Follow the show at Locked On Mets. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listen every day. And after a second listen, check out Locked On Sports Today. Peter Bukowski has you covered with everything going on in the sports world with instant game reactions, breaking news, and so much more. You can find Locked On Sports Today on the Odyssey app, on YouTube, or wherever you get podcasts.